Good morning to the Chief Justice and the Honorable Justice. May I please the court? My name is Muhammad Farid bin Faizal, with my correspondent Mr. Ramu. I will represent as plaintiff at this court at the state of Johor Bahru. Into the case, Mr. Lee was instructed by his principal Mr. Ramu to find a double-story house in Seremban for price not exceeding RM500k. But Mr. Lee found a single-story bungalow for RM700k, and without informing Mr. Ramu, he agreed with the seller and paid a deposit RM1k. The evidence that I'm going to present will prove to you that the defendant is guilty as a charge.
Good morning to the Chief Justice and the Honorable Justice. May I please the court? My name is Nurin, with my counsel, appellant Mr. Lee. I will represent as defendant at this court at the state of Johor Bahru. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, under the law, my client is presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Your Honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case raises the issue whether Mr. Ramu can sue Mr. Lee because Mr. Lee did not follow Mr. Ramu's instruction about buying the house not more than RM500k. In my opinion, my client, Mr. Ramu, can sue Mr. Lee because he disobeying Mr. Ramu's instruction. Mr. Lee bought a single-story bungalow for RM700k in Nilai and without informing my client. This is under Section 164. An agent is bound to conduct the business of his principal according to direction given by the principal, or in the absence of any such direction, according to the custom which prevail in doing business of the same kind at the place where the agent conduct the business. When the agent act otherwise, if any loss be sustained, he might make it good to his principal, and if any profit occurs, he must account for it. As example, in the case of Turbine vs. Bilton, the principal can sue the agent for disobeying instruction.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, under the law, my client is presumed innocent until proven guilty. During this trial, you will come to know the truth that in this case, Mr. Ramu can't sue Mr. Lee because Mr. Lee found a house by his own reasonable diligence. Stated in Section 165, where an agent is bound to conduct the business of the agency with as much skills as is generally possessed by persons engaged in similar business. As example, the case of Club Boys vs. Muat, an agent might have certain interests that might conflict the interests of their principal. In such situations, an agent can avoid placing himself in a conflict situation by disclosing any potential conflict to his principal, who may then, if he so wishes, permit the agent to continue to act for him in full knowledge of the potential conflict. Based on decision of Club Boys vs. Muat, the court should allow an appeal by Mr. Lee and dismiss a claim by plaintiff Mr. Ramu. Your Honor, respondent made one point that I will address. Respondent stated that my client, Mr. Lee, disobeyed Mr. Ramu's instructions to find a double-story house in Seremban. That's not more than RM500,000. However, Mr. Lee found a single-story bungalow for RM700,000 in Nilai, and he paid a deposit of RM1,000 using his own money and not his principal money. First of all, Mr. Ramu didn't even give Mr. Lee a deposit money. He just instructed Mr. Lee to find a house. So, I don't think it is wrong for Mr. Lee to find a house anywhere other than in Seremban, because he used his own money for the deposit. If Mr. Lee disobeying his principal instructions, I'm sure that he didn't even go find a house. But in this case, he still find a house, isn't it? One of the things they must prove is that my client intended to find a house just like Mr. Ramu asked him. That means there is a reasonable doubt, and therefore you must find him not guilty.
Your Honor and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as the conclusion, in this case, Mr. Ramu can sue Mr. Lee because Mr. Lee disobeyed his instruction to find a house not more than RM 500k. And Mr. Lee made a deal without telling Mr. Ramu for a single story bungalow for RM 700k in nilai. Based on the section 164, Mr. Lee is bound to conduct the business of Mr. Ramu according to his order given, which is to find a double story house in Seremban for a price not more than RM 500k. That shows that the defendant intended to disobey his principal instruction. In today's case, based on the decision of Turpin vs. Bilton, the court should have that Mr. Lee was liable for damage when he made a deal for a single story bungalow which the price more than RM 500k, which is RM 700k. Thank you.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for the foregoing reasons, I respectfully request that the court find in favor of the appellant, Mr. Ramu can't sue Mr. Lee because Mr. Lee found a house by his own reasonable diligence. Based on section 165, Mr. Lee is bound to conduct the business by searching a house for Mr. Ramu with as much skill as is generally possessed by persons engaged in similar business. In our case, based on the decision of Club Boys vs. Muay, the court should allow an appeal by Mr. Lee and dismiss a claim by plaintiff Mr. Ramu. My client is the only person who knows what he intended and testified under oath that he wasn't trying to disobey his principal instructions. That means that there is a reasonable doubt and therefore you must find him not guilty. Thank you.